As memory and recall are much in the news these days, I am reminded of a time when I was in New York and in college, and I lived on the seventh floor, and I was taking an elevator down, and on the fourth floor, my neighbor who lived on that floor got on the elevator with two other guys and went down and left. And it turns out that these two guys had later in the day tortured and murdered my neighbor. And long story short, the police found out that I had been in the elevator and had seen them. They called me in to make an identification of the would-be murderers, which I did. I identified the murderer incorrectly. The reason I identified him incorrectly was that when he was standing there in the lineup, he looked like a murderer to me. He was smiling. He looked like he wasn't bothered being in that lineup. I associated that with his cold-bloodedness. I took that incident while that time there in the lineup, and I kind of plastered it on my memory of what had happened a few weeks earlier. And again, it was totally wrong, and it was just a really good for me an abject lesson in how what happens to you right now can affect your recollection of what happened to you some time before.
Memory is as fallible as perception, plus a little bit. You don't even know that what you're laying down to begin with is all that great, but added on to that, every time you recall a memory, you remake it. A few months after John F. Kennedy's assassination, people were asked, "Who'd you vote for?" And I think he won, I don't know, with something in the low 50s. But I think something along the lines of 70% of the people said they voted for JFK. That's a recall that is influenced by the current surround, and that's very common how memory works. There's slippery little priming influences of the current environment.
How can we think about memory neurobiologically?
The cellular basis of memory is something that was presciently hypothesized by Donald Hebb, a Canadian neuroscientist, Canadian psychologist. Hebb postulated memory is in the synapses, and he's absolutely right. I mean, that's what we now think, is that memory is not in cells per se, it's in connections, it's in synapses. And it's those synapses that either strengthen or weaken, depending on whether you're remembering or forgetting, and depending on the circuit involved. I remember reading, I can't remember who it was, but he wrote something in the autobiography to memoir category. I'm not sure what the difference is, but he approached his life as though he was a journalist. So he kept on checking his own recall. And that is something I was very influenced by that. And I think that's exactly right.
This is an argument for assiduous note-taking.
It's good to get that physical confirmation. There are people that believe that eyewitness testimony is no longer something that we should be counting on. And I think that there's a lot to that.